When I walked into that courtroom that morning, my son Danny rolled his eyes and whispered something dismissive to his wife, Brittany. But then something extraordinary happened. The judge looked up, froze completely, and whispered in disbelief, "It can't be." Silence filled the entire courtroom. No one there had any idea who I really was until that moment. That moment changed everything. I am Margaret Thompson. I'm 67 years old, and until a few months ago, I lived a completely ordinary life. Every morning, I would wake up promptly at 6 o'clock, prepare my Earl Grey in the same cracked cup that has been with me for 2 decades, and gaze out the window of my modest kitchen while tending to the orchids that my late husband Bob cultivated with such care. It was a quiet and routine existence, filled with small habits that brought me serenity. For 4.5 decades, I dedicated myself entirely to my only son, Danny. I worked during the early morning hours cleaning offices, sold homemade cakes on weekends, and sewed custom pieces to earn extra income. All of this so he could study medicine and achieve the prosperous life I never had. When he married Brittany, a calculating nurse who never spoke a kind word to me, I suppressed my intuition and welcomed them into my home every Sunday with a carefully set table and my warmest smile. I imagined that after my husband Bob's passing, Danny and I would strengthen our bond. What an illusion that was. Instead of seeking mutual support in each other's company, my son began to see me as a burden. His visits became cold obligations, his phone calls became sporadic, and his excuses to avoid me became progressively more elaborate. The most devastating moment of my existence came on a gloomy Thursday in October. I had prepared the chicken stew he loved so much, the kind that consumed hours in the kitchen, but always brought a smile to his face when he was a child. I spread out my finest tablecloth, the one with embroidery I had made myself during his teenage years, and even bought fresh flowers to beautify the centerpiece. When they finally arrived, Brittany entered my home with the posture of someone who felt like the owner, settled into my late husband's favorite armchair, and turned on the television without even greeting me. Danny wore a green shirt that I had chosen for him myself, but his expression was as cold as a winter morning. "Mom, we have a serious matter to discuss," he declared with that tone he had adopted since marriage, an intonation that sounded completely foreign to my ears. He positioned himself on the edge of the chair, like someone anxious to leave. "Brittany and I have reached a conclusion," he continued while she remained on the sofa, mesmerized by the screen. "This house is excessively large for one person. You no longer have the ability to manage it properly, and we need a larger space for when we expand our family. We found an ideal residential community for people in your age group." I felt as if the world was collapsing around me. This was the house where Danny took his first steps, where we celebrated every special occasion, where his father breathed his last while holding my hand. I had prepared the chicken stew he loved so much, the kind that consumed hours in the kitchen, but always brought a smile to his face when he was a child. I spread out my finest tablecloth, the one with embroidery I had made myself during his teenage years, and even bought fresh flowers to beautify the centerpiece. When they finally arrived, Brittany entered my home with the posture of someone who felt like the owner, settled into my late husband's favorite armchair, and turned on the television without even greeting me. Danny wore a green shirt that I had chosen for him myself, but his expression was as cold as a winter morning. "Mom, we have a serious matter to discuss," he declared with that tone he had adopted since marriage, an intonation that sounded completely foreign to my ears. He positioned himself on the edge of the chair, like someone anxious to leave. "Brittany and I have reached a conclusion," he continued while she remained on the sofa, mesmerized by the screen. "This house is excessively large for one person. You no longer have the ability to manage it properly, and we need a larger space for when we expand our family. We found an ideal residential community for people in your age group." I felt as if the world was collapsing around me. This was the house where Danny took his first steps, where we celebrated every special occasion, where his father breathed his last while holding my hand. Every corner housed our most precious memories. Every portrait on the walls told our story. "But Danny, this is our home. Our entire history is here," I pleaded, my voice failing, each syllable coming out fragmented from my throat. "Memories reside in the soul, Mom, not within four walls," he retorted, with a coldness that pierced me like a blade. "Furthermore, the community offers recreational programs for people of your generation. You'll adapt better there. You'll have social interaction with your peers." Brittany displayed a satisfied smile as she began to assess the rooms with her gaze, as if she were already the rightful owner. "It's for your own good, Mrs. Margaret," she added with that artificial smile that disgusted me. "We'll take care of all the paperwork. Don't worry about the details." My heart shattered into countless fragments. My own son, the child for whom I had given up my youth, my vitality, and my dreams, was banishing me from my own home to hand it over to this unscrupulous woman. Tears threatened to overflow, but I held them back. I would never give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I need time to think," I murmured with what little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Danny replied, standing up. "The decision has already been made. The appraisers will come to examine the property next week." And so they left. They abandoned my stew and dumplings untouched, my flowers wilting, and my heart shattered on the table where we once were, a united family. That night, sleep completely eluded me. I remained in the kitchen contemplating the photographs on the wall. Danny as a newborn, Danny on his first day of school, Danny at his graduation ceremony. In all the images I was present, holding him, embracing him, radiating maternal pride. How did we reach this point? How did the boy who once declared that I was his hero now treat me like a disposable object? The following days transformed into true torment. Brittany brought a real estate appraiser without prior notice, a man in a gray suit who walked through my home as if it were merchandise on display. He took notes, measured rooms, and discussed potentially necessary renovations, as if my presence were irrelevant. Danny escorted him, agreeing with every disparaging comment about my home. "The plumbing is obsolete," the appraiser commented, "and these kitchen tiles are outdated. Everything would need to be replaced." My husband installed those tiles with his own hands when Danny turned 10. Each piece represented hours of dedication, affection, and expectations for our future. But to them, they were merely obstacles to their new existence. The humiliation reached its peak when Brittany brought brochures from the retirement community. "Look here, Margaret. It has stunning gardens and they host bingo on Tuesdays," she said, with that artificial voice she used when she intended to persuade me. "Moreover, it has round-the-clock nursing care. You'll enjoy greater safety." I had lived in this house for 3 decades without a single incident. I knew all the neighbors. I had my routines, my plants, my memories. But to Danny, none of this held any relevance. The only important aspect was my removal from his path. On the day I least anticipated, they arrived carrying documents. Brittany entered with an air of ownership, followed by Danny and an individual who identified himself as a lawyer. "Mrs. Margaret, we've prepared all the documentation for the property transfer. We only need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, perplexed. "I assumed you were going to sell the house." Danny averted his gaze. "Well, Brittany and I concluded that it would be more advantageous for the family to keep the property." It was at that moment I understood everything. This wasn't just about removing me. They intended to appropriate my house, the legacy that my husband and I built with so much effort. It was theft disguised as filial concern. "I won't sign anything," I declared with the firmest voice I could muster. Brittany stood up abruptly, her countenance transforming completely, revealing the aggression she had always kept hidden while my husband was alive. "Ma'am, you no longer have the capacity to make decisions. Danny is your only heir and is acting in your best interest." "This is my home," I exclaimed, surprising myself with my own determination. "And I don't intend to abandon it." "Mom, don't make this more complicated," Danny murmured, finally showing some discomfort. "You know you can no longer live alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the stove. It was a lie. I never forgot to turn off the gas. But Brittany smiled as if she had found the perfect justification. Come on, Danny. Your mother isn't well. It's dangerous to leave her alone. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, perhaps we'll have to explore other legal alternatives. A mental incapacity proceeding, for example. I felt the world closing in on me. My own son was willing to declare me incompetent to usurp my house. The woman I had accepted as a daughter-in-law was threatening me in my own living room, and I, a 67-year-old woman, was completely alone against them. I need time, I murmured, defeated. You have 1 week, Brittany said coldly. Then we'll do whatever is necessary. When they left, I collapsed into my husband's armchair and cried like I hadn't since his funeral. I cried for the son I had lost, for the home they were taking from me, for the life that was disintegrating around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, completely defenseless. That night, for the first time in my existence, I considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to resist. Maybe it would be better to accept my fate and disappear silently, exactly as they wanted. But then something inside me refused to die. A small flame of dignity that still burned in my chest. I wouldn't allow them to trample me without a fight, not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Danny returned alone. For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe he had reconsidered. Maybe he had come to ask for forgiveness. How wrong I was. Mom, I came to help you pack, he said, with that robotic voice he had adopted. I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the boy I had raised, but I only found a stranger, cold and calculating. Danny, please reconsider. I am your mother. That's exactly why I'm doing this, he replied, without looking me in the eyes. Because I love you and want what's best for you. Love. This was love. Taking away my home, my dignity, everything I had left. This was love. In the following hours, Danny began packing my belongings as if they were worthless objects. He took my family photographs and carelessly stuffed them into boxes. He packed the books my husband gave me, my wedding china, the tablecloths I embroidered during years of sleepless nights. This dress is so old, Mom. I don't think you need it, he said, holding my mourning dress, the same one I had worn to my husband's funeral. Leave that, I begged. Please leave that. But he had already put it in a donation bag. My pain didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. I didn't matter. The last straw was when he found my jewelry box. Inside were my wedding ring, the earrings my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that belonged to my mother. These jewels will be safer in a vault, Danny said, putting them in his bag. They could get lost or stolen in the community. Those are mine, I screamed, trying to snatch the bag from him. Mom, you're getting very upset. This only confirms that you can't take care of yourself, he replied with that nauseating calm that chilled me to the bone. At that moment, I knew I had lost my son forever. The Danny I knew had died, and in his place was this heartless man, manipulated by Brittany and blinded by greed. That night when Danny left, taking my jewelry and my most precious memories with him, I was alone in my half-empty house. The bare walls reminded me of how little I had left, how easy it had been for them to dismantle an entire lifetime. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, and wondered how I had reached this point, at what moment I became invisible, when I stopped mattering. The following days were hell. Brittany arrived early every morning to supervise the process, as if I were incapable of packing my own things. She brought strangers who measured, photographed, and evaluated every corner of my house. They talked about me as if I weren't present, as if I were an old piece of furniture that needed to be removed. You'll have to speed up the process, Brittany told Danny. The movers will arrive on Monday. It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the house where I lived for 30 years, where I raised my son, where I loved and was loved. What if I don't finish packing? I asked in a whisper. "Don't worry, Mom," Danny replied without taking his eyes off his phone. "The movers will take care of everything. Just take what's essential." Essential. As if an entire lifetime could be reduced to the essential. That afternoon, after they left, I walked through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in every chair where we had breakfast as a family. I opened every drawer that held small treasures from my past life. In my husband's desk drawer, I found old letters, paid bills, and some documents I had never seen. Most of them weren't important, but there was a folder I had never noticed. It was marked with my husband's initials and had a small lock. Curious and desperate to find something, anything to connect me to better times, I searched for the key in all his usual places. I finally found it inside an old book, marking a page that talked about investments and real estate. When I opened the folder, my world changed forever. There were documents I didn't completely understand, but one immediately caught my attention. It was a will dated only 6 months before my husband's death, which I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had a much broader vision than I imagined. And Danny, my dear Danny, had no idea what he was about to discover. With trembling hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been so reserved about money, had been much busier than I imagined during his final years. The document revealed that my dear husband wasn't just the modest lab technician I believed him to be. For decades, he had discreetly invested every extra penny he earned. He bought small properties when prices were low. He had invested in stocks of companies that were now worth a fortune. And he had accumulated wealth that I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly specified that I was the sole heir to everything. Danny would receive only a small amount if I died, and only if he had cared for me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Brittany that I refused to recognize. There was also a clause that took my breath away. My husband owned the entire building where Danny and Brittany lived. The apartment they thought they were paying for monthly was actually ours. All the tenants in the building were paying rent to us, and that rent had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The amount was astronomical. For 2 years since my husband's death, I had been living like a poor widow, while a fortune accumulated in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband had shares in the company where Brittany worked. Not just minor shares, but a significant stake, enough that he could practically influence company decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large piece of land on the outskirts of town that was now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. Everything was there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was his empress without even knowing it. But what impacted me most was a personal letter I found at the end of the folder. It was handwritten by my husband, addressed to me. "My dear Margaret," the letter said, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and you've found this treasure I saved for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard. You always sacrificed so much for Danny and me that I wanted to make sure you would never want for anything." Tears began rolling down my face as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never completely trusted Brittany. There's something about her I don't like, an ambition that worries me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Danny takes care of you and respects you as you deserve, he'll have a comfortable life. But if he treats you badly or tries to take advantage of you, you have all the power to protect yourself. My husband predicted exactly what was happening. He saw through Brittany from the beginning and prepared my defense before he died. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and teach. Deep down, Danny is a good person. He's just confused. But if you need to defend yourself, now you have the tools to do it. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I lost and for the son I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, these weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, hope, and yes, also silent satisfaction. Danny and Brittany thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea that I owned the building where they lived, shares in the company where she worked, and properties throughout the city. They thought they were kicking me out of my house to take it for themselves, not knowing that this house was the least valuable thing I owned. That night I didn't sleep. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of sadness. It was because my mind was working, planning, calculating. My husband gave me more than money. He gave me power, and now I had to decide how to use it. Monday morning arrived with light rain tapping on the windows. Danny and Brittany arrived early with the movers, expecting to find me with my bags packed and ready to leave. Instead, they found me sitting calmly in my favorite armchair, drinking tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing? The movers are already here," Danny said with that impatience he had developed. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied with a calm that surprised even me. Brittany approached with that threatening smile I knew so well. "Mrs. Margaret, we already talked about this. You have no choice." I looked her directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Brittany, I have no choice. But it turns out you don't have one either." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because Danny approached with a worried expression. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about the fact that I just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't worry. You'll understand everything soon." Danny and Brittany looked at me with that expression they reserved for when they thought I was talking nonsense. But I was no longer the same frightened woman from the previous week. I had a plan, and most importantly, I had the power to execute it. "Mom, enough games," Danny said with irritation. "The movers are waiting and have other jobs after hours." "Then they can leave," I replied calmly, "because they're not moving anything here." Brittany stood up abruptly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice in this matter." "On the contrary, Brittany, I think you're the one who doesn't understand the situation." I slowly rose from my chair and walked to the table where I had left some of the documents I found. Not all of them, just some I needed for this conversation. "Did you know that your apartment, the one you've been living in for 3 years, was never paid to the real owner?" Danny frowned. "What are you talking about? We pay religiously every month." "Yes, but you pay to a property management company that in turn deposits the money to me because I own the entire building." The silence that followed was deafening. Brittany was the first to react with a nervous laugh. "That's impossible. You live on a miserable pension." "I lived on a pension because I chose to," I replied, enjoying every second of the confusion. My husband was much smarter than any of us imagined. I showed them one of the property deeds. Danny took it with trembling hands and read it once, twice, 3 times. This can't be real," he murmured. "It's as real as the fact that you're kicking me out of my own house to take it for yourselves. But it turns out this house is the least valuable thing I own." Brittany snatched the document from Danny's hands. Her face paled as she read. "This has to be fake, a forged document." "You can verify it whenever you want," I said, with a smile I hadn't felt in months. "In fact, I encourage you to do so." Danny collapsed on the sofa, as if his legs had been cut. "Why didn't you ever tell us anything?" "Because I didn't know until 3 days ago." "Your father kept this secret to protect me. What a visionary he was." Brittany began pacing around the room, clearly agitated. "This changes everything, Danny. If your mother really owns the building, it means she can evict us whenever she wants, along with all the other tenants who have been paying me on time for 2 years. I completed the sentence for her. "You can't do this," Danny said, his voice cracking. "We're family." "Family?" The word came out of my mouth with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you were going to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house. Like when you packed my memories as if they were trash. Like when you took my mother's jewelry. Danny began to cry. But these were no longer the manipulative tears he had learned to use. They were tears of genuine terror. Mom, please. We can fix this. It was all Brittany's idea. Danny, Brittany screamed, furious that he was blaming her. It's true, he continued, ignoring her. She convinced me it was what was best for you. She said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you believed her? I asked, feeling my heart break once more. Do you know your mother so little that you'd believe her more than your own intuition? The movers, who had been waiting at the entrance, approached confused. Excuse me, are you going to take the things or not? Because we have another job in an hour. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved here. You can go. Brittany approached me with that aggression she had always hidden. This isn't over, old woman. We're going to contest these documents. We'll prove they're fake. Go ahead, I said, unperturbed. Meanwhile, I hope you have enough money saved to find another place to live, because on the first day of next month, you'll receive an eviction notice. You can't do this to us, Brittany screamed, completely losing her composure. I can and I will, but don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the 30 days the law allows. Danny suddenly stood up from the sofa. Mom, please, you have to understand. Brittany told me that if I didn't convince you to move, she would leave me. She said she couldn't stand living knowing you were here alone, being a danger to yourself. And does that justify everything you did to me? I asked. Does it justify treating me like trash, carelessly storing my memories, taking your grandmother's jewelry? I'll give it back to you right now, Danny said, desperately searching in his bag. It's too late for that, Danny. Brittany approached again, but this time her attitude was different. She was no longer threatening, but almost pleading. Mrs. Margaret, we can reach an agreement. Danny is expecting a child. Are you really going to throw your grandchild out on the street? I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Danny was expecting a child, and he hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I found out through blackmail. Is it true? I asked Danny. He nodded through tears. I wanted to tell you differently. I wanted it to be a special surprise, like the surprise of kicking me out of my house, I replied, although I felt my determination beginning to waver. But then I remembered my husband's words in his letter. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and teach. Danny needed to learn, and his child deserved to grow up with different values than those Brittany was teaching. The news of the pregnancy disarmed me for a moment. But then I remembered all the pain they had caused me. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the contempt, or the months of suffering they put me through. Congratulations about the baby, Danny, I said, with a calm that was difficult to maintain. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Danny begged. Think about your grandchild. Do you really want him to grow up without knowing his grandmother? His grandmother has been here all along, I replied. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Brittany tried one last manipulation. Mrs. Margaret, if you really have as much money as you say, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at her with the contempt she deserved. A united family like when you threatened to declare me mentally incompetent? Like when you turned my son against me? I never stayed quiet, Brittany. I interrupted her with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers left, leaving us alone in the tension that filled the entire house. Danny cried silently. Brittany paced back and forth like a caged animal, and I felt strangely calm for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find another place to live. During that time, I don't want to see you around here, unless it's a real emergency. And after that, Danny asked, his voice broken. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Brittany exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? The word made me laugh bitterly. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me? Like when you used a mother's love to blackmail me? It's different. Brittany murmured. But she didn't even sound convincing to herself. You're right, I admitted. It's different because I actually have the power I'm using. Danny slowly stood up from the sofa. Is there anything we can do to change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation. But I don't think Brittany is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that hope. I want an apology, a sincere and true apology for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash. And I want Brittany to admit that all of this was her idea. Brittany's face turned red with anger. I will never humiliate myself in front of you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Danny looked at her pleadingly. Brittany, please. She's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, she screamed. I won't bow down to this old manipulative woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Danny's jaw dropped, finally seeing his wife without the lenses of blind love. Old manipulative woman, I repeated softly. Interesting, is that what you really think of me, Brittany? No, Danny murmured. But she had already lost control. Yes, that's what I meant. I think so. A bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy. That's why she made up this whole story about the money. Made up. I went to the table and picked up more documents. Did I also create these bank statements? Did I create these property deeds? Did I create these stock certificates? I placed each document on the dining table, one by one, until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my fortune. Danny approached and began examining the papers with trembling hands. My God, Mom, this is real. It's all real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your wife is so desperate to discredit me. Brittany tried one last move. Danny, you don't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's a liar. No! Danny suddenly shouted, surprising all of us. Stop it, Brittany, just stop! She turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity. And the worst part is I did it because she convinced me you were a burden. Danny, don't listen to her, Brittany tried, but he completely ignored her. She filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. She made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to stay home. Danny, be quiet, Brittany ordered. But it was too late. Never tell me to be quiet again, he yelled at her. I'm sick of your manipulations. Tired of you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Danny had defended something he believed was right, instead of blindly following his wife's orders. Brittany looked at him with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. If you choose your mother over me, Danny, this relationship is over. Danny stood still for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, he straightened up and looked her directly in the eyes. Then it's over, he said with a voice I'd never heard from him before. Brittany was paralyzed, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. For years, she had controlled every decision, every thought, every movement of his. And now, for the first time, he had told her no. You're not serious, she murmured with a nervous smile. You're going to have a child, Danny. You can't raise a child alone. I won't be alone, Danny replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that looked like love. I have my mother, but I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights of crying, the feeling of having lost my only son, all of this didn't disappear with a few words. Danny, I said softly, I appreciate that you finally opened your eyes, but that doesn't solve everything that happened. His face fell. Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Brittany, seeing that she was losing control of the situation, adopted a different attitude. Suddenly, she knelt in front of me with a look of repentance that I knew was false. Mrs. Margaret, you're right. It was all my fault. I convinced Danny that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured him to make difficult decisions. Please forgive me. I looked at her, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see her so devastated after months of arrogance. "You're asking for forgiveness now, Brittany, when you discover that I'm not the poor and helpless old woman you thought I was. I was terribly wrong," she continued with that performance I also knew. "Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family." "A happy family?" I repeated. "Like when you threatened to declare me mentally incompetent. That was a mistake. Like when you called me an old manipulative woman 5 minutes ago." Brittany swallowed hard, realizing that every word she said was being used against her. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You were showing your true face for the first time." I turned to Danny, who was watching the scene with a look of shame and pain. "And you, Danny, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think an apology erases all of this?" "No," he admitted, his voice choked. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make things right." "How?" Danny looked at Brittany, who was still kneeling on the floor with a pleading expression. Then he looked at me. "By leaving her," he said finally. "By abandoning this woman who convinced me to betray the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." Brittany stood up abruptly. "You can't be serious. You're going to have my child." "I'm going to have my child," Danny replied with a determination that filled me with pride, despite everything. "A child. I don't want him to grow up seeing his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother." "Danny, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Brittany threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," he shot back. Brittany looked at both of us with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'll prove that both of you are crazy." "With what money are you going to fight?" I asked calmly. "Because tomorrow morning I'm going to talk to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions?" Brittany's face turned completely pale. "You wouldn't dare. After everything you did to me, of course I would. This is abuse of power," she murmured. "Like when you abused a mother's love to manipulate me. Like when you abused Danny's trust to turn him against me." Brittany headed toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "This doesn't end here," she said, her voice full of venom. "I'm going to destroy both of you." "Go ahead and try," I replied unperturbed, "but do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building." "1 hour? You said we had 30 days. That was when Danny was with you. Now that he's alone, there's no reason for you to continue living on my property." Brittany slammed the door behind her, making the entire house shake. Danny and I were alone for the first time in months, surrounded by heavy silence and documents that proved a reality still difficult to process. "Mom," Danny murmured after a long time, "can you forgive me?" I looked at him, this 30-year-old man who had just discovered he was living a lie, who had betrayed his mother for a woman who wasn't worth anything, who was expecting a child and was alone. "I don't know, Danny," I replied honestly. "You hurt me a lot." "I know," he whispered, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." "Starting with what?" "Starting by returning your mother's jewelry to you," he said, taking out the little bag he had taken days before, "and asking if I could stay here tonight. I have nowhere to go." I looked at the bag with my mother's jewelry. Then I looked at my pregnant and alone son and felt my heart soften a little. "One night," I said finally, "but tomorrow we'll start talking about how you're going to regain my trust." Danny nodded with tears of gratitude streaming down his cheeks. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make things right." But I knew that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. The real test would come in the following days. The following days were strange and tense. Danny stayed in his old room, which I had kept exactly the same since he got married. During the day, we walked around the house like two polite strangers, talking only about necessary things. Breakfast, the weather, morning sickness. But I was watching, observing every gesture, every word, every attempt Danny made to regain my trust, and what I saw gave me hope. For the first time in years, my son was doing things for himself without expecting someone else to solve them for him. He washed the dishes immediately after eating, kept his room spotless and even began helping with household chores without me asking. On the third day, while I was watering my orchids near the window, Danny approached with a cup of tea in his hands. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded without turning to look at him. I was learning that silence was more powerful than 1,000 words. "I've been thinking a lot these past days," he began, sitting in the chair where Brittany used to sit like a queen. "About everything that happened, about the things I did and said." I continued watering my plants, waiting. "I realized it wasn't just Brittany who changed me. I allowed her to change me. I chose to believe her instead of trusting my own heart." Finally, I turned to look at him. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes and looked thinner, despite the recent pregnancy. It was evident he wasn't sleeping well. "And why do you think that happened?" I asked him. Danny sighed deeply. "Because it was easier to blame you than face the fact that I had married the wrong person." This honesty caught me by surprise. I expected apologies, justifications, but not such a raw admission. "When Brittany started complaining that you visited too much, I knew deep down that she was being unfair. But it was easier to think you were clingy than accept that she was selfish." He placed his hands on his belly where the pregnancy barely showed. "When she started suggesting you move to a retirement community, I knew it was wrong, but she convinced me it was for your own good. And I wanted to believe her because it meant I wouldn't have to face the real problem." "What was the real problem?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. That I had married a woman who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who would never change. In the days that followed, Danny began telling me things that gave me chills. How Brittany gradually isolated him from his friends, convincing him they were a bad influence. How she controlled every penny he spent, saying men didn't know how to handle money. How she convinced him to work overtime because real husbands were dedicated to supporting the family. "And you never thought about talking to me about this?" I asked him one afternoon. "Brittany told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from another generation. She convinced me that if I told you our problems, you would tell me to leave her, and she didn't want any external interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the previous one. My son suffered in silence while I believed he was happy. And when he finally tried to get closer to me, it was too late because Brittany had programmed him to see me as the enemy. 2 weeks after Brittany left, Danny received a call that left him pale as a ghost. "It's the building manager," he said, his voice trembling. "Brittany is in the lobby. She says she has the right to come up because she's still my wife." "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't want to see her, but she won't leave. She's screaming that she's going to call the police, that this is kidnapping." I stood up from my chair with a calm that surprised me. "Tell the manager to come down. I'm going to talk to her." "Mom, she's very upset. We don't know what she's capable of." "Exactly," I replied. "That's why I have to go there." When I got to the lobby, I found Brittany furious, screaming at the poor building manager who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old woman kidnapped my husband," Brittany was screaming. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Brittany," I said with a serene voice. She turned to me, her eyes red. She had obviously been drinking. "Give me back my husband right now." "Danny is exactly where he wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property. You're a liar." I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speaker. "Attorney Victoria," I said when she answered. "This is Margaret. I have an agitated woman here who refuses to leave my building. Could you confirm that I'm the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret," my lawyer's clear voice replied. "You are the sole owner of the building located at 847 Maple Street." Brittany fell silent while listening to the legal confirmation. The manager looked at her with a mixture of fear and embarrassment, finally understanding the situation. "Do you need me to clarify anything else, Brittany?" I asked after hanging up. "This isn't over," she murmured, but she no longer sounded convincing. "You're right," I agreed. "Because tomorrow I'm going to talk to your supervisor at the company and the day after to the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful when you have enough money." Brittany left without saying anything else, but I knew she would be back. People like her don't give up easily. 2 months later, The day of the trial arrived like a storm we were expecting. Brittany kept her threat and sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, asking for full custody of the baby Danny was expecting. That morning, while I was getting dressed in my best black suit, Danny entered my room with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," he confessed. "What if the judge believes her? What if she takes my baby?" I hugged him for the first time in months, feeling his body tremble against mine. "That's not going to happen," I assured him. "We have the truth on our side." When we arrived at the courthouse, Brittany was already there with a lawyer who clearly cost her more than she could afford. She looked at me with that familiar hatred. But this time, it didn't intimidate me. I had something she would never have: the peace of mind of someone who knows they're on the right side. Danny and I sat on our bench. He wore a blue suit that highlighted his more mature appearance, and I wore the earrings my husband gave me as an anniversary gift. We were prepared. Brittany's lawyer began his argument portraying me as a vindictive woman who used her money to destroy a happy marriage. He talked about manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her son had grown up. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Victoria, stood up elegantly and began presenting the evidence. Text messages where Brittany insulted Danny. Recordings where she threatened to leave if he didn't kick me out of the house. Testimonies from neighbors who heard her screaming and abuse. But the decisive moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. "Mrs. Margaret Thompson?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge took off his glasses and studied me carefully. "Did you work at St. Mary's Hospital 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor, I was a nurse in the cardiac wing. You helped me when I was a medical student. You taught me how to organize medical records. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone treated me like I was invisible." The entire courtroom fell silent. Danny looked at me in amazement. Brittany turned pale, and I felt as if the world had stopped. "Your Honor, I am Judge Dr. David Stevens," the judge continued. "Do you remember me?" And then I saw beneath the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the authority was the shy young man who had worked at the hospital decades ago. The boy I defended when other doctors made fun of him. The one I encouraged when he doubted his abilities. "David," I murmured, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "Of course I remember you." The judge smiled, and for a moment, he was that insecure young man again, seeking approval. "I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Margaret. You told me that one day I would be a great doctor when I didn't even believe it myself." Brittany and her lawyer exchanged panicked looks. They knew they had lost before it even began. "Your Honor," Brittany's lawyer interrupted, "I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Judge Stevens replied firmly. "There is only justice, and after analyzing all the evidence presented, it's clear that Mrs. Brittany Foster was the only manipulator in this story." The verdict was resounding. Brittany lost all her rights to the baby and was prohibited from approaching Danny and me. She also had to pay court costs and a settlement for moral damages. When we left the courthouse, Danny hugged me like he hadn't since he was a child. "Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you?" "Life goes in circles, dear," I replied. "And kindness always comes back when you least expect it." 6 months later, when my granddaughter Sophia was born, I understood that everything had been worth it. Danny had recovered his essence. He became the loving father I always knew he could be. One afternoon, while we were rocking the baby in our house's garden, Danny asked me a question I was expecting. "Mom, have you really forgiven me?" I looked at him. This man who had grown so much in such a short time, who had learned to value what was really important. "I forgive you, Danny," I said finally. "But the most important thing is that you've learned to forgive yourself." That night, while I prepared tea in my old cracked cup, I thought about my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he expected, not to hurt, but to protect and teach. Danny learned that true love isn't based on control, but on respect. And I learned that it's never too late to defend your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where my granddaughter was playing, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories taste better when they take time to arrive. In the end, I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to remember who I really was and defend it with the peace of mind of someone who knows they're on the right side of history. 5 years after the trial, my life had taken a turn I never could have imagined. Little Sophia, now a 4-year-old girl with her father's bright eyes and my same determination, ran through the garden chasing butterflies while Danny and I prepared Sunday lunch. "Grandma Margaret, look what I found," Sophia shouted, running toward me with a yellow flower in her small hands. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her up to give her a kiss. "Shall we put it in the vase with the others?" Danny smiled at me from the kitchen. In these years, he had flourished in an extraordinary way. He had returned to studying and now worked as a cardiologist at a thriving clinic. And above all, he had recovered that spontaneous laughter I remembered from his childhood. "Mom, a letter arrived for you," he said, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I had established 2 years ago with part of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a refuge for elderly women who suffered abuse or family abandonment. What began as a way to honor my own experience had transformed into something much bigger. "What does it say?" Danny asked, drying his hands on his apron. "They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house," I replied, feeling that deep satisfaction that only comes from knowing your pain served a good purpose. They're going to shelter 15 more women. In these years, we helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. Some arrived like me, stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone, without family, but with similar stories of abandonment and mistreatment. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Danny went to answer and came back with a mysterious smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Behind him appeared retired Judge David Stevens, accompanied by an elegant woman with gray hair. "Mrs. Margaret," he greeted me with that warm smile he had kept since he was young. "I want to introduce you to my wife, Elena." "It's an honor to meet you," Elena said, shaking my hands. "David has told me a lot about you. He said you were one of the most important people in his professional training." "He exaggerates," I replied, but I was deeply moved. "Not at all," David insisted. "And that's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Retired Judges Association is going to give you an award for your work with the foundation." "It's not necessary," I began to say. "Yes, it is," he interrupted me. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on true justice, the kind that goes beyond written laws." After they left, Danny and I sat on the porch while Sophia played with her dolls. The garden was more beautiful than ever. I had hired a gardener, but I still personally cared for the orchids my husband loved so much. "You know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Danny asked me suddenly. "What?" "That you never became bitter after everything I put you through. After all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I became bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment consumed me inside. But your father taught me something very valuable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That true power doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something useful for others." Danny nodded, understanding that he himself had experienced that transformation. He was now a volunteer at the foundation, using his own experience to counsel young people who had fallen into toxic relationships. "Did you find out what happened to Brittany?" he asked. "My lawyer, Victoria, told me she moved to another city. It seems she got married again." I paused, choosing my words carefully. I hope she learned something from all this. But honestly, that's not my problem anymore. "Aren't you even curious?" "No," I replied honestly. "I learned that some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. After you learn the lesson, you can let them go." Sophia came running with rosy cheeks from playing so much. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandmother?" It was her favorite story, a child-friendly version of what happened. In my version, The grandmother discovered she had magical powers and used them to protect her family from a big evil dragon. One more time? I pretended to complain, but I was already lifting her to sit on my lap. Yes, and don't forget the part where the good doctor helps her. As I told the story for the umpteenth time, I thought about how strange fate was. I had to lose everything to discover what I really had. I had to hit rock bottom to find my true strength. And they lived happily ever after? Sophia asked when I finished. Happily ever after, I concluded. The brave grandmother found her happy ending. Did you find your happy ending, Grandma? Sophia said. I looked around. Danny was setting the table for dinner. The garden was in bloom. My beautiful granddaughter was in my arms. And the Foundation's letter promised to help even more women. Yes, my love, I replied. I did. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the letters that arrived weekly from the women we had helped. An elderly lady, 75 years old, thanked me for giving her courage to face her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman told me she got her house back after her grandchildren tried to deceive her. Each letter was confirmation that my experience had served a purpose greater than my own pain. Danny sat next to me with his own cup of tea. What are you thinking about, Mom? About your father, I admitted. How proud he would be of what we built. I'm sure he's watching us, Danny murmured. And about you, I continued. How proud I am of the man you've become. I learned from the best, he replied, taking my hand. We sat in silence, enjoying the tranquility of the night. In the distance, you could hear the soft noise of the city. But here, in our garden, peace reigned. I love you, Mom, Danny whispered. And I love you, dear, I replied. I always loved you, even in the darkest moments. And it was true. A mother's love transcends hurts, disappointments, betrayals. It's stronger than pride, more lasting than resentment, more powerful than any fortune. That night, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without worries. I had found something worth more than all the money in the world, the peace of knowing I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about how much money I had or how much power I had exercised. It was about transforming my pain into purpose, my humiliation into strength, and my experience into wisdom for others. I learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to change your story. And when the doctor recognized my voice in that courtroom, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was the universe reminding me that every act of kindness, every moment of gentleness, every time we choose to help instead of judge, creates waves that return to us when we need them most. Life really goes in circles, and in the end, what matters isn't what happens to us, but how we choose to respond. I chose dignity. I chose forgiveness. I chose to transform my pain into power to help others. And that choice made all the difference. The foundation continued to grow. More houses opened. More women found refuge and rebuilt their lives. Danny became not just a successful cardiologist, but a man who understood the value of family, respect, and unconditional love. Sophia grew up knowing she was loved, knowing her grandmother's story of courage and resilience. She learned that sometimes the quietest people have the strongest voices, and that true power comes not from money or position, but from the courage to do what's right. Years later, when Sophia was old enough to understand the full story, she asked me, "Grandma, weren't you scared when you had to fight them?" "Terrified," I told her honestly. "But sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared, and you always knew you would win." "No, sweetheart. I didn't know if I would win, but I knew I had to try, because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible." As I write this story now, many years later, I think about all the women who have passed through our foundation doors. Each one arrived broken, defeated, convinced they had no value. Each one left knowing their worth, understanding their strength, ready to face whatever came next. That's what my husband's gift really was. Not just the money, though that certainly helped. It was the reminder that I had value, that I mattered, that my life had meaning beyond what others thought of me. The orchids in my garden bloom more beautifully each year. Danny often says they're responding to all the love in our home now. Sophia helps me tend them, learning patience and care, understanding that beautiful things take time to grow. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that terrible Thursday when Danny and Brittany first told me I had to leave my home. I remember the fear, the helplessness, the crushing weight of betrayal. But I also remember the moment I found those documents, the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about discovering I had money. It was about discovering I had choices. For so long, I had felt powerless, at the mercy of other people's decisions about my life. But power had been there all along, waiting for me to claim it. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom, though that was satisfying. The real victory was in reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my right to determine my own future. It was in learning that love without respect isn't love at all, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries. Danny learned that lesson too. He learned that real strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it means admitting you were wrong, even when it means walking away from someone you thought you loved. The foundation has become my greatest legacy, but it's not the only one. Every time Danny stands up for someone who can't stand up for themselves, every time he treats his patients with dignity and respect, every time he shows Sophia that love means protection and care, not control and manipulation, that's legacy too. Every time Sophia sees a problem and thinks about how to solve it instead of just complaining, every time she stands up to a bully at school, every time she shows kindness to someone who seems forgotten, that's the legacy continuing. The ripples of that terrible time and the choices we made in response to it continue to spread outward. The women we've helped have gone on to help others. Their children have learned different lessons about love and respect. Their grandchildren will grow up in homes where dignity is valued and voices are heard. That's how change really happens. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those have their place. It happens in the quiet daily choices to treat people with respect, to listen to their voices, to remember that everyone has value. I think about Brittany sometimes. I hope she found peace. I hope she learned to love without needing to control. I hope she discovered that real security comes from within, not from manipulating others. But whether she did or not, that's her journey to make. My journey led me here, to this garden where my granddaughter plays, to this foundation that helps women find their voices, to this family that understands the difference between love and control. It led me to the understanding that it's never too late to stand up, never too late to change course, never too late to choose dignity over defeat. The doctor who recognized my voice that day changed everything, but not because of who he was. He changed everything because he reminded me of who I was. Someone who had always helped others, someone who had always seen value in people others overlooked, someone who had always believed in the power of kindness. I had forgotten that person in the midst of my pain and fear, but she was still there, waiting for me to remember her strength. That's what I want every woman who comes to our foundation to understand. The strength is already there. The value is already there. The voice is already there. Sometimes it just needs to be reminded, supported, and given space to grow. Every morning when I wake up and tend to my orchids, I remember Bob's letter. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and teach. I think I've done that. I think he will be proud. The sun is setting now as I finish writing this story. Sophia is helping Danny prepare dinner, their laughter floating through the open windows. The orchids are blooming in the golden light, and somewhere in the city, women who once felt powerless are living lives of dignity and purpose. This is what victory looks like. Not the dramatic moment in the courtroom, though that was important. Not the money, though, that provided security. Victory looks like an ordinary evening with family, like flowers blooming in a well-tended garden, like the quiet satisfaction of knowing you used your second chance to make the world a little bit better. It looks like peace. It looks like love. It looks like home. And it was worth every moment of the fight to get here. The letters keep coming. Just yesterday, I received one from a woman named Sarah, 72 years old, who had been living in her car after her son sold her house without her knowledge. She found our foundation through a social worker, and now she has her own small apartment and has reconnected with a daughter she hadn't spoken to in years. "You showed me I still had fight left in me," she wrote. "I thought my story was over, but it was just beginning a new chapter." That's what this is all about. New chapters, second chances. The understanding that as long as we're breathing, we have the power to change our story. Danny has started speaking at medical conferences about elder abuse and family manipulation. He tells our story, not to shame anyone, but to help other healthcare professionals recognize the signs. He's become an advocate for patients who might not have advocates otherwise. "I was part of the problem," he tells these audiences. "I let someone convince me that my mother was a burden instead of seeing her as the treasure she was." We have to do better. We have to listen better. We have to look beyond the surface and see the whole person. It's not easy for him to share those details, to admit his mistakes so publicly. But he does it because he knows it might help someone else's mother, someone else's family. Sophia, now in kindergarten, has started a kindness club at her school. Every week, the children do something nice for someone who seems lonely or left out. When I asked her where she got the idea, she said, "You taught me that everyone matters, Grandma, even when they seem small or quiet or old." Out of the mouths of babes, the foundation has expanded beyond what I ever imagined. We now have partnerships with legal aid societies, healthcare providers, and social services. We've helped draft legislation to protect elderly people from financial abuse. We've trained law enforcement officers to recognize the signs of elder manipulation. But the heart of it remains the same. One woman helping another woman remember her worth. I still live in the same house, though we've made some modifications as I've gotten older. Danny wanted me to move somewhere more manageable, but this time his concern came from love, not manipulation. We compromised. He moved back into his old room permanently, and we converted the basement into a small apartment for him and Sophia. 3 generations under one roof, but this time by choice, with respect and boundaries and love. The orchids have multiplied. What started as Bob's small collection has become a greenhouse full of rare and beautiful varieties. Sophia has her own small section where she grows the hardier types, learning patience and care. She talks to them while she waters them, telling them about her day, her dreams, her plans. "Plants are good listeners," she told me once. "They don't interrupt or tell you you're wrong. They just grow." Smart girl. She gets that from both sides of the family. I've started writing a book about our experience, working with a publisher who specializes in stories of resilience and recovery. It's not easy, reliving those dark months, but I think it's important. Too many people suffer in silence, thinking they're alone, thinking they have no options. The book will include resources, legal information, and stories from other women who found their way back to dignity and independence. It will have a section for family members too, helping them recognize when love has become control, when concern has become manipulation. Danny is writing a chapter about his experience, about how easy it is to lose sight of what matters when you're being manipulated by someone you trust. It's a hard chapter to write, but an important one. I want other people to recognize the signs I missed, he told me. I want them to understand that love doesn't demand you abandon the people who raised you. Real love makes room for everyone who matters. The legal case against Brittany was settled years ago, but its effects continue to ripple outward. The precedent it set has been cited in other cases involving elder abuse and financial manipulation. Judge Stevens, now fully retired, sometimes speaks at legal conferences about the importance of looking beyond the surface in family disputes. Sometimes, he says, the person who seems most vulnerable is actually the strongest person in the room. Sometimes the quiet voice is the one we most need to hear. I've been invited to speak at conferences too, though I prefer the smaller, more intimate settings. I like talking to groups of women, sharing tea and stories, listening to their experiences. There's something powerful about sitting in a circle, looking into each other's eyes and saying, "You matter. Your voice matters. Your story matters." Last month, we had a reunion of sorts at the foundation. Women who had come through our program over the years gathered to share their stories, their progress, their continued challenges. There were tears, but mostly there was laughter. There was pride. There was the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've not just survived, but thrived. One woman, Maria, had started her own small business making and selling traditional foods from her home country. Another, Janet, had gone back to school at 68 and become a certified counselor specializing in family therapy. A third, Rose, had reconnected with children who had been turned against her and was now helping to raise her grandchildren. "We're not victims anymore," Rose said during the gathering. "We're warriors. We're survivors. We're women who know our worth. That's the real victory. Not just individual healing, but collective strength. Not just personal recovery, but community transformation." The ripples continue to spread. Sophia's Kindness Club has inspired similar programs at other schools. Danny's medical advocacy has led to new protocols for identifying and addressing elder abuse. The foundation's work has been replicated in other cities, other states, but it all started with one woman sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by boxes and broken dreams, finding the courage to open a folder that would change everything. It started with the decision to fight back, to stand up, to remember that dignity is not something others can take from you. It's something you choose to claim. As I finish writing this story, the sun is setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sophia is practicing piano in the living room, the melody floating through the house like a promise of beautiful things to come. Danny is in the kitchen preparing dinner and humming along to her music. This is what peace sounds like. This is what home feels like. This is what victory looks like when it's measured not in conquest, but in love. The orchids are blooming in the evening light, their petals catching the last rays of sunshine. Bob would be amazed at how they've flourished, how they've multiplied, how they've become a symbol of resilience and beauty in the face of adversity. Just like the women who've passed through our foundation doors. Just like the family we've rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal and manipulation. Just like the life I've created from the ruins of what I thought was my ending. It wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. The doctor recognized my voice that day in the courtroom. But more importantly, I recognized my own voice. I remembered who I was, what I was worth, what I was capable of when pushed to my limits and beyond. That voice, quiet but strong, gentle but unbreakable, that's the voice that changed everything. That's the voice that built a foundation, that healed a family, that turned pain into purpose and suffering into service. That's the voice that every woman carries within her, waiting to be heard, waiting to be honored, waiting to change the world one act of courage at a time. And that voice, once found, can never truly be silenced again.